This is Kinda Murdery Season 1, Ghost Towns of the Mojave Desert, presented by Criminal Content.
You're rocketing down the 15 freeway between Vegas and LA. It's a scorched wasteland of airstream meth labs and unrelenting heat. This is no place you'd want to stop. But the car's on fumes, so you take the exit and you pull up to the gas station. It's abandoned, a concrete canvas that some local Michelangelos turned into the Sistine Chapel of spray paint penis. A grave marker for every crazy story lost in the desert sands. These are the ghost towns of the Mojave Desert. And this is Kinda Murdery. Hey everybody, and welcome to Kinda Murdery Season 1, Ghost Towns of the Mojave Desert. I'm your host, Zevon Odelberg. Thanks for deciding to be here. We are here today with Jerry Paulley. I wanted to ask you, what was the inspiration for Hillbilly Horror Stories? Did something particular happen in your life that made you decide that this was the show that you wanted to do?
When I was 12, 13 years old, we moved into a house. And after being there for about a year, it turns out we started having some paranormal activity. Now,
wow.
looking back, I tend to think a lot of this stemmed from my mother. If you know much about paranormal activity, a lot of times it's caused from a young teen going through pubescence time of their life. There's a lot of angst and emotions and hormones and everything going on. And this energy can sometimes create things that happen around you. Most of the time it's young women, but for whatever reason, sometimes it can be somebody older if they've got a traumatic experience that's going on in their life, and my mom did at the time, and all this tied in to the time where she started having these experiences, which is why I think that, she was involved in a lot of this stuff happening. But we had about 5 years of paranormal experiences, and priests coming in and blessing the house, and,
oh my goodness,
psychics coming in. And it was kind of crazy, but that 5 years is what really piqued my interest in the paranormal.
I see why your favorite movie is The Exorcist now.
Right.
Yeah.
That was actually my favorite before that.
So was your mother alive at this time, or were these paranormal experiences were your mother's ghost?
No, what happened? She was alive at the time. My mother was raised. She had a very, I'm not going to say abusive, because that's really technically wouldn't be the same, but she had a very rough childhood growing up. Her mother was not around. She was kind of an alcoholic and gone a lot. Her father had left at an early age, so she was a single mom. And, from the time she was 12, 13, 14 years old, she was pretty much raising her brothers and sisters, because her mom would go off for 2, 3, 4 days at a time, and nobody knew where she was. And so this,
on a bender or something, yeah.
Yeah, so she was pushed into adulthood very early. They didn't have much money. And she eventually ended up turning to her grandmother and grandfather on the maternal side, and they raised her. So that was, in all essence, her mother and father. And when her grandfather passed away, which was right at about a year after moving in that house, it was very traumatic for her. It was something that she really couldn't get over. And then her grandmother passed away 4 months later.
Oh, no. That's awful.
Yeah, those two things combined, it put her in a situation, and I'll tell you about the very first thing that happened so you can see how it ties in. We were sitting in the living room, and we were watching the 700 Club, and they had a call-in number. She was on the phone talking to someone, and far away from us, all the way across the other side of the room, we had a big console television, and it had a little pin cushion on there that was like, basically it looked like a recliner, or like a chair, but it was just designed to put your pins and your thread and stuff in. We had a bunch of stuff sitting on it. I think of Elmer's glue. We had some house numbers where we had just been painting the house sitting there. And as she's on this prayer line, this thing pops up in the air about 2 feet, and it just lands on the floor and scatters everywhere.
Whoa.
And that was the very first instance, and then it took off from there. So that's what leads me to believe, like I said, I didn't know this back then, but years later, looking back, this is why I think I don't necessarily know if it was a demon or a ghost or what it was, or if it was something she was manifesting just because of, her anguish at the time.
My goodness. And so I guess is that why Poltergeist is not your favorite movie?
Actually, Poltergeist is right up there too. The remake was horrible, but the first one was good.
Yeah.
Awesome. And also, besides, your show is about horror stories, about the supernatural, but it's specifically hillbilly horror stories. So can you talk a little bit about that and why you feel like, would you say you identify as a hillbilly, and if so, why?
Originally, the thought was it was going to be nothing but Southern ghost stories. And so when coming up with a name, Southern, and I was trying to think, okay, do we use ghost stories? Are we going to use horror stories, scary stories? And I landed on horror first, and I thought, okay, well, what can we put in front of it? That Southern and hillbilly just came up. It was kind of an alliteration, but it was no real reason other than the fact I thought it was catchy, and it fit only because we were doing Southern stories, which 6 months later we're doing stories from all over the globe, so it really doesn't even fit anymore.
Well, either way, it's a great name.
It certainly is. And are you from Kentucky, or do you just live in Kentucky now?
No, we're born and raised in Kentucky.
All right. Well, hey, it's been so fun to learn all about the show and about your background and some of the real life paranormal experiences that you've had yourself. And all right, guys, I got a little bonus story here for you from this week's town of Lebec, California. It's called The Legend of Linden's Laundry. You ready?
Let's do it.
We're headed back to 1929 for the story of 50-year-old Lebec Hotel laundryman Frank R. Linden, who may have been a German count, but who certainly discovered that in Lebec, a man's home is not his castle. Get ready for the Lebec legend of Linden's Laundry. I want to say at the outset, just to frame this story for you guys a little bit, that what it really is, I think, is a story of mistaken identity, or maybe not.
Pretty much sums it up.
Linden works at the Lebec Hotel as a laundryman. It's worth noting that at this time in history, in the 1920s, the Lebec Hotel was a top-of-the-line 5-star hotel and a favorite getaway for Hollywood stars and executives who would escape the city and go hang out in luxury up in the mountains. It was known to be frequented by Clark Gable, by Gary Cooper, by Clara Bow, and others. So it was despite the town being tiny, this was a very fancy and famous hotel. And Frank Linden ran the laundry there. So one night, Frank Linden is at home with his wife and his daughter, and there's a knock on the door. And he comes to the door and he says, "Who is it?" And the answer is, "It's the sheriff's department." And he says, "Well, which sheriff's department?" And they say, "It's the Bakersfield Sheriff's Department." And he says something to the effect of, "I'm going to get you bastards." And starts...
Just for showing up? Showing up results in a "I'm going to get you"?
Well, you'll find out why he had that reaction in a moment.
Okay.
There with the 3 sheriff's deputies is a man named A.M. Moody, who has presented himself as a federal agent from the Justice Department. Here's the thing. Linden's house had a screen door, and that door was open because he initially answered the door, and he says, "I'm going to get you bastards," and he starts to walk away, at which point one of the sheriff's deputies shouts, assumes he's going to go get a gun, and tells him to stop, and he doesn't. So Linden's there in his own home. He's denied the sheriff's entry, and when he does not stop walking away from them, Deputy Sheriff Renfro, who's assuming that Linden is going for a gun, actually takes his shotgun barrel, shoves it through the screen on the screen door, and blasts Linden in the back. Back full of buckshot, Linden staggers around the room for a moment and falls down dead.
Wow.
It's worth noting that also home with Linden was his wife and his foster daughter, who happened to also be his niece. So here's what had happened earlier in the day that had inspired the federal agent and the sheriffs to go to Linden's house. And this is the story as told by Linden's wife. Linden's daughter has informed them that there's a criminal out there that somehow knows her, or that she knows, who means to do her harm, or in Linden's estimation, at the very least, to do what he says, take her out on a drive away from the protection of her parents. Well, when Agent Moody shows up in town, he is unknown to Linden, and Linden hears about this new guy in town, and for a reason that we don't know the specifics of, he believes that Federal Agent Moody is in fact this criminal who has threatened the welfare, or perhaps just wants to have inappropriate before marriage relations with his foster daughter. So Agent Moody is eating at the cafe in town when who should show up but a furious Mr. Linden carrying a gun. And Mr. Linden basically confronts Federal Agent Moody in the cafe, pulls a gun on him, and he says, "Get the hell out of here, and if you come anywhere near my family, I will kill you." So that is the...
So he practically invites the agent to come and investigate him.
Yeah, exactly.
Turns out he's moody, too.
Yeah.
He's like, "What's up, dude? I'm incredibly suspicious and potentially violent."
Yeah, exactly. So that is the inciting incident. That is the inciting incident that inspires Moody to bring the sheriffs to Linden's house. Now, I've got a bit of a bombshell to drop here. The reason Moody was in town in the first place was to question Linden's daughter about a federal case involving white slavery.
Whoa.
Right. So what does that mean? It's something of a sad chapter in American history about a law that was passed for one reason and then enforced for another and worse reason. And I'll get to that in just a second. So the Mann Act was ostensibly passed to curb sex trafficking. It basically made it illegal to transport women, and generally in this case, it was enforced in the case of a white woman, across a state line. But so the idea was they were trying to wipe out sex trafficking. In practice at that time, how it was often used, and it was famously used this way against the boxer Jack Johnson, who was the subject of that documentary Unforgivable Blackness. It was often used to specifically persecute interracial marriages. So what would happen is if a white woman was in a relationship with a black man and they traveled across a state line, the racist authorities would show up and essentially say, well, there's no way she's with you willingly. You must be transporting her against her will, and then prosecute the person under the Mann Act. That is not necessarily the only way that the Mann Act was used, but it was a common way that the Mann Act was used. Yeah, it's a dark little chapter in American history. So when Federal Agent Moody is there to question the daughter/niece about facts of a white slavery case, basically what that means is that he's following a lead in a Mann Act prosecution, which could perhaps be to stamp out prostitution, but was more often employed as a means to attack interracial relationships.
Wow.
Right.
So does it seem like... Well, I guess maybe you'll tell us, so I'll stop.
No, go. No, please.
Well, I guess my question is then, like, is she being questioned as a potential victim of slavery, or is she being prosecuted, or is she being questioned about a relationship she's had, and is her surrogate father potentially being violent to the police to get them to not further investigate the fact that he's maybe harboring someone, or I don't know. It just seems like there's
The answer to that is anything is possible. I'm going to be straight up with you. This is a mystery of a case. There are several things that may have happened. I have some more details to share now that will shed some light, but not all the light. Now, there's a few little iffy questions here, because remember, not everything is mutually exclusive, right? So Moody shows up to Linden's house with 3 sheriff's deputies in tow. They're 3 sheriff's deputies from Bakersfield, which, while it is the closest sort of mini metropolis, one has to assume that in the town of Lubbock, especially with this highfalutin hotel where there were often the biggest movie stars in the world, I mean, we're talking Clark Gable here, there had to be a local lawman of some sort. Notably, there is no local lawman in tow when these sheriffs and this federal agent go to Linden's home. So I think there are a few possibilities of what may have happened here. One is that Linden truly believed that this federal agent was this man who had threatened his daughter. But why would he believe that? And, without wanting to cast any aspersions on a possible victim, you have to wonder, did his foster daughter tell him specifically that that man in town was the man who had threatened her? And if so, why would she be inspired to do that? Is it possible that she herself had an interracial relationship that Agent Moody was there to investigate, and she, because she knew how her family would react, didn't want that investigation to happen, and so she concocted a story about a criminal who had threatened her to try to, and that criminal being the federal agent, to try to inspire her foster father to go chase the man off. Then there's another question. There's another possibility, and this is where it gets even a little bit weirder when it comes to the misunderstanding part of things. When they do the autopsy on Mr. Linden, they find, who was a German man, they find 2 other healed bullet wounds, and they discover that he bears a striking resemblance both from appearance and known injuries to a German count, to a titled German count who has left Germany. Yeah. So, I don't. So I could tell you. So
we're back to vampires then.
Yeah, back to vampires. So when we find out he's a German count, I couldn't help but wonder, did he bring her to America from Germany in sort of a Cinderella situation where he was working her like a servant in their home, and perhaps that's what Agent Moody was there to investigate, because again, the Mann Act was not always employed racially, and maybe that's why he didn't want them snooping around, and why the wife had such a different story of what happened.
So you think the wife invented the idea that the surrogate daughter had claimed someone was threatening her in order to recontextualize the events? I certainly think that it is possible. Yes. Mm-hmm. So this is interesting too. So the next day, Agent Moody is gone from town. No one knows what became of Agent Moody, and no one knows whether or not he had a warrant or any actual means to enter and investigate the home of this guy initially. And so then here's another question. Agent Moody may in fact be a federal agent, but he could be both a federal agent and the guy who was trying to behave inappropriately with Linden's daughter. They're not mutually exclusive, right? Or another possibility that we've discussed in previous episodes is that perhaps he is part of the secret society of vampire hunters and he's taking out the count.
That is true. 1 episode about vampires, 2 episods about vampires.
Here we go again.
We're big fans of the Count from Sesame Street around here, Jerry. Do you like the Count?
I like the Count. That was actually a pretty good impersonation. So
Thank you.
The one and only impersonation he can do.
Yes. My impersonation skills are limited. I can also impersonate an extremely circuitous storyteller, though. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed that. Jerry, is there a version of this story that you find to be the most believable, or is it all just one giant grain of salt in your mind?
I mean, to me, they all sound plausible. But I think the whole possible interracial relationship stands out, but also the fact that he could have brought her over from Germany. I mean, I think I would lean those two ways. It's a tough call.
Yeah, it is. And then they killed the man in what seemed almost to be an execution. It made me feel like there was some larger bailiwick that was being covered up almost.
Certainly seems possible.
I wish I had an answer for exactly what that was.
I'm sticking with vampire hunting. It's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
No,
There's no bears, it's vampires.
Yeah. Yeah. So all the sheriff's deputies, as well as Agent Moody, are found to be innocent. It's considered a justifiable killing, and that's pretty much the end of the story.
Desert justice.
Indeed. You shouldn't be shooting a guy in his own home as he has his back to you walking away. And the sheriffs say that they shot at him because they presumed that he was going to get a gun. But he did not have a gun at the time. He had his back turned. He's walking away. The guy shoves that shotgun barrel through the screen door and blows the man away. To me, almost feels like an execution for some shadier reason.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Seems a little impatient.
This is Kinda Murdery, Ghost Towns of the Mojave Desert, presented by Criminal Content. You can find us online at kindamurdery.com and on all social media at kindamurdery. Email us at contact@kindamurdery.com. Listen to us on all your favorite podcasting apps: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Google, and more. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and tell your friends about the show.